This is the last video of the supply side policies mini-series. This is the fourth and last video. This is unit 2.6 of the IB Economics macroeconomic syllabus. In this video, I will conduct an evaluation of how effective supply side policies are. So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages, or strengths and weaknesses of supply side policies? The first factor we're going to look at is time lags. Usually the benefits of supply side policies are often reaped only in the long run. That's why they might not be very politically popular, because they're usually policies that the benefits are only reaped in the long run. If you think about it, investments in education and training, you don't see the immediate benefits of these investments. You see them in the long run. In terms of ability to create employment, interventionist supply-side policies will create employment in both the short run and the long run, because they increase aggregate demand in the short run and then they increase long-run aggregate supply in the long run. Market-based may or may not create unemployment in the short run, but they always create employment in the long run. So whether they create unemployment in the short run or not, that's not entirely clear, or it depends on the policies, but they will always create employment in the long run. What about the ability to reduce inflationary pressure? Okay. This will depend on the type of policies. So interventionist supply-side policies may be inflationary in the short run. Why? Because they increase aggregate demand. However, in the long run, they will reduce inflationary pressure in the long run when both the LRAS and the SRAS curve increase. Market-based may or may not reduce inflationary pressure in the short run, depending on the policy, but they will definitely reduce inflationary pressure in the long run. So remember, we know that supply-side policies will reduce inflation pressure in the long run. Now, whether or not they reduce inflation pressure in the short run will depend on the type of supply-side policy. So buildings in investments in infrastructure, for example, they involve injecting money into the economy in the short run. This increases aggregate demand, so may actually add to the inflation pressure in the short run. But definitely when the LRAS curve shifts in the long run, this will reduce the inflationary pressure on the economy. In terms of impact on economic growth, well, interventionist supply-side policies will create both short-run and long-run economic growth, because aggregate demand increases in the short run, so that's short-run economic growth, and LRAS increases in the long run. Market-based, the effect on short-run economic growth will depend on the policy, but they definitely cause long-run economic growth. Why? Because the LRAS curve will shift to the right. So, supply-side policies will definitely cause long-run economic growth. Now, whether they cause short-run economic growth or not, that will depend on the policy itself. What about the impact on the government budget? Interventionist supply-side policies cost a lot of money in the short run. They may drain the government budget in the short run, and that's one of the reasons why they can be politically unpopular if the government can't afford to run a budget deficit. Market-based supply-side policies, when you have cuts in income and business taxes to increase incentives for people to work and businesses to invest, as well as deregulation and trade liberalization, this might reduce government revenue sources in the short run. If you're cutting income and business taxes and you're deregulating and liberalizing trade, the government's losing all of these tax and tariff revenue sources in the short run. So they might actually have a very negative impact on the government budget, especially in the short run. What about the effect on equity? Well, some supply-side policies will improve the distribution of income by lowering the natural rate of unemployment. Remember, when the LRAS curve, long-run aggregate supply curve, shifts to the right, that means the natural rate of unemployment has decreased. So you have achieved a little bit of increased equity. However, some supply-side policies will involve a trade-off between efficiency and equity. For example, labor market reforms. They might improve efficiency, but it comes at the expense of equity. If you cut and abolish the minimum wage, for example, or you lower the power of trade unions, you're making the labor market more flexible and more efficient, but unfortunately it comes at the expense of equity. What about the effect on the environment? Well, supply-side policies are often aimed at growing the productive capacity and potential output of the economy. This can often lead to the overuse of natural resources and unsustainable consumption patterns. So the government really has to be mindful of the effect of supply-side policies and achieving economic growth on the environment. Because unfortunately, if you look at history, humans have always prioritized economic growth, even if it comes at the expense of negatively affecting the environment.